Welcome to Reality 56, which seems a lot like our reality at first glance. Kings and queens still reign with iron fists, and knights still ride across the nation under flags of faith and might. Castles still stand over muddy towns. But in this odd mirror of Earth, something happened hundreds of years before it should have. The internet was born. Not the bright screens we know, but a network of wires, gears, crystals, and signals that changed the very core of the Middle Ages. It all started with curiosity, like most big shifts do. Monks who lived in stone monasteries and were committed to both God and the secrets of numbers and stars found a technique to send signals across copper threads that had been soaked in alchemical salts. At first, it was just sparks, lines of electricity that ran from one monastery to the next. But soon, words began to flow along those threads. The monks termed it the sacred web, which they thought was a gift from God. The word got out fast. Picture peasants in the fields hearing that they didn't need horsemen or ravens to send messages anymore. A farmer in France might talk to a scholar in Byzantium without leaving his village. Merchants, who were always looking for an edge, paid for the construction of towers where crystal transmitters flashed like beacons. By 1200, the web had spread across Europe like veins. The odd new light of communication made cities throb, and even kingdoms started to shake. At first, leaders liked it. Kings and emperors thought the web would help them keep control. Orders could be sent right away. Spies could make reports right away, and taxes could be counted faster. But sharing power is a challenge to power. For the first time, the regular people could speak out beyond the confines of their villages. A blacksmith in Florence may send a letter to a weaver in London. A nun in Spain could argue with a priest in Rome, and many people might read what they said. The church, always on the lookout, called the web holy, then sinful, and then holy again. Some people said it was the sound of angels whispering through cables. Some others said it was a devil's trap that disseminated lies quicker than the truth could catch up with them. But no order could stop it. It was impossible to undo the web once it was built. The Middle Ages, which used to be a time of gradual travel and development, turned into a storm. Ideas that used to take decades to cross mountains suddenly jumped over kingdoms in seconds. When a peasant insurrection broke out in one area, it spread like wildfire throughout the internet. When experts translated works that were against the rules, people copied and disseminated them in every language. The internet became a place where people fought over their beliefs. But the web wasn't the same as ours. There were no screens or flashing gadgets in people's hands. Instead, every city created big rooms called scriptoriums of the web. People could see words projected onto sheets of polished glass on long tables with crystal readers inside. The gears and wheels that kept the signals going were kept in good shape by runners. Children who were good at seeing and typing quickly were trained to be web scribes, who helped messages go where they needed to go. And in the middle of all this new invention, new people came to power. Not knights in shining armor, but weavers of the net, people who knew how to control the web. Some people utilized it to trade and became richer than kings. Some people promoted ideas that were against the law and called for the overthrow of monarchy. There were whole guilds that arose, not to make things or fight, but to regulate this odd new fabric of the world. An invention that was hundreds of years ahead of its time has set Reality 56 on fire. And as kingdoms bent and twisted under its weight, one question rang out in every hall, pub, and cathedral. Was the web a gift from God, or was it the product of something much worse? By 1250, the sacred web was more than just a miracle of communication. It was the heart of kingdoms. Every castle, cathedral, and guild hall wanted to link to its light strands. People who couldn't go on the web were left behind, alone like forgotten islands in a sea of voices that was getting bigger. People who used it found both prosperity and danger, for no secret was safe once it was whispered over its wires. Kings and queens rapidly found out that their power didn't just come from swords and money. It depended on having control over the web. A message transmitted through its copper veins might wake up an army faster than any trumpet. Decrees didn't go on parchment. They went as luminous lines across crystal readers in faraway cities. Wars that were once plotted in secret came out in the open. Not on muddy grounds, but in the flow of information, where rumors and lies may hurt more than swords. The nobles were the first to take advantage of this. They paid scribes and weavers to fill the internet with songs praising them, stories of their successes, and rumors about their enemies' misdeeds. A lord who used to govern by fear now needed reputation. If the web turned against him, there could be a rebellion before his banners ever got to the field. The art of propaganda was born centuries early, not in printing machines, but in glass, that glowed. The church, which was desperate to keep its power, called web sermons sacred. Priests sat in huge scriptoriums, where their words were copied and sent forth to other kingdoms. Crystal screens brought in whole crowds, and their hymns echoed from one monastery to the next. Yet even here, danger lurked. Rival sects disseminated their own ideas quicker than Rome could stop them. Now, every hamlet could ask its priest questions. Every believer could debate with a bishop. The faith that held everyone together started to break apart under the weight of 1,000 voices. But the web was most scary during conflict. The Crusades, which used to take months of planning, turned into campaigns that were planned in real time. Commanders communicated commands through crystal relays, telling knights to move across deserts like they were moving pieces on a board. Glowing runes were used to keep track of supply chains, making sure that food and weaponry got to the front lines with a level of accuracy that was unheard of in our history. The battlefield turned into a network, with troops linked by unseen lines of command, but the web also let people down. Spies learned how to change its signals so that soldiers would follow fake commands that lead them into traps. Cities didn't fall to siege engines. They fell because of fake signals that made them think their allies had left them. In the early cyber wars of Reality 56, people didn't use machines. They used scribes and crystals. Each side tried to outsmart the other in the never-ending deluge of information. For ordinary people, this new age was both amazing and scary. Peasants who had no voice before now organized councils across boundaries and made their complaints known to everyone. Farmers in England and shepherds in Spain talked about how to rotate their crops. Fishermen in Venice told ports far away of storms as they happened. But revolt also spread like wildfire. A single hamlet uprising may bring friends from all over the continent before the king's warriors could even get on their saddles. In the middle of all this upheaval, secret guilds of weavers became stronger. These people were not rulers, priests, or kings. They were the controllers of the web itself. They knew how to change its currents, fill it with lies, or lock it up with codes. Some offered their services to leaders, some to rebels, and some just went about their own secret plans. Many people thought the weavers were more dangerous than armies since they could bring down countries with just a whisper. Reality 56 was on the verge of change by the middle of the 13th century. There were still castles, knights, and banners, but the web was always there, affecting every choice, every fight, and every belief. And in the silent halls of monasteries far from monarchs and armies, fresh rumors began to stir. If the web could transport words, could it one day carry images? Or perhaps the voice of a man? The web was no longer just for monarchs and priests by the beginning of the 1400s. It had gotten into people's lives, the marketplaces, the workshops, and even the bars. For the first time, regular people could learn things that were only available to monasteries and royal courts. The Middle Ages banners and swords still covered the world, but under them a strange new light was flickering, the brightness of discovery. Artisans and craftspeople were some of the first to take advantage of it. A blacksmith in Prague didn't just use his father's hammer and knowledge anymore. He could talk to smiths from Florence, Cordoba, or Constantinople through the crystal readers in the city's scriptorium. The internet was full with information about how to forge, which used to be kept secret by guilds. Tools got sharper, weapons got deadlier, and metal got stronger. A single new idea in one part of Europe may spread throughout the rest of the continent in a matter of weeks. Artists also changed in some way. Painters might send sketches of their work to people they would never meet, and others in other cities could praise or criticize them. Sculptors spoke about new techniques in passionate letters, which let their art grow through conversation instead of silence. Even the poorest bard in a little forgotten village could put his ballads on the internet, and sometimes those songs would go farther than he could ever go. Stories that used to die with the people who told them now live on in archives built inside crystal towers. But the most obvious differences between Reality 56 and other realities were in the sciences. Astronomy, which monks used to do by looking at the stars, is now a shared field of study. It was easy to compare observations from Cairo and Paris right away. Mistakes were fixed, patterns were found, and hypotheses were made that might have taken hundreds of years in our reality. Farmers learned how to care for their soil and rotate their crops from others who lived far away. This doubled their harvests. Doctors talked about odd diseases that crossed borders and shared treatments and cures. Alchemists, who were always part magician and part scholar, suddenly had a place to prove what they said. Some failed terribly, while others got very near to truths that had been waiting for generations in our history. The web had more than just knowledge. It also had creativity. Legends of far-off places that used to be vague tales turned into comprehensive narrative that were shared on luminous glass. People's views of the world were formed by stories of monsters, miracles, and wonders. Some people thought these stories were funny. Some others believed them so strongly that they went on pilgrimages not to holy relics but to truths they found online. Something completely new came out of faith and fantasy. Of course, not all changes were good. The previous guilds lost power because they relied on secrets, and the flood of knowledge made them weaker. Many tried to regulate the flow by building closed networks that only their members could use. But barriers didn't last very long. Information was hard to get a hold of, and once it got out, it spread quickly. The guild masters who sought to stop the flow often got swept away by it. As children, they learned to read illuminating glass before they could even write on parchment. They got faster with their hands than their parents and learned how to read signals better. For a lot of parents, the internet was a strange and hazardous distraction that filled their kids' heads with notions they couldn't control. But to the kids, it was the only world they knew, a place where lines were crossed and voices traveled between realms. Every year, the question of who owns what got clearer. Was the web a tool for the people, the church, the monarch, or the guilds? Every group said it was theirs. They all tried to make it do what they wanted. But the web had its own essence, a force that couldn't be controlled. It shared information freely, broke down walls, and would not stay in chains. By 1350, rumors of a new age were spreading across Europe. It wasn't a time of knights and crusades. It was a time of ideas, art, and new ideas. The Renaissance had come, but not in the 1500s or 1600s. It came a whole century earlier, not from explorers and printing presses, but from copper threads and dazzling crystals. And with this Renaissance came a terrible realization. If men could exchange wisdom so swiftly, then lies too could spread with equal speed. The same web that may cure could also kill. And in Reality 56, truth and lies were already fighting a war that was much more dangerous than steel. The web was no longer a fresh and exciting thing by the middle of the 14th century. It had grown into something huge, wild, and very much alive. What started out as a marvel of information now spread rumors, lies, and half-truths faster than any king's order. And although scholars and craftsmen still use technology to make things and study, other people found a darker art: the manipulation of perception. The first big scandal broke out in Paris. A fake message spread through the city's scriptoriums, saying that the monarch had sold holy artifacts to lords from other countries. The message spread quickly, being replicated into thousands of luminous messages. Before the truth could be told, people rioted outside the palace gates. The king called the claim a lie. But the harm was done. There was still doubt, even after. Trust had broken. If you couldn't trust what you read online, who could you trust? From then on, the internet became a place where people tried to trick each other. Nobles found out that they could kill their enemies with whispers instead of weapons. If enough people hear an accusation of treason, it might hurt a family for decades. Guilds changed trade records to make their earnings look bigger and hurt their rivals. Priests preached against each other on the radio, calling each other heretics. The whole fabric of medieval society, which was once tightly held together by slow-moving rumors and strict hierarchies, began to come apart at the seams because of the speed of lying. The weavers, the hidden guilds that knew how to use the web, made the most money. They learned how to change signals, put in bogus words, and delete embarrassing information. A weaver might make a faithful knight look like a traitor to the kingdom for the appropriate price, or start riots in communities that had never thought of rebelling before. Kings hired them as spies, rebels paid them to stir up trouble, and merchants exploited them to change the way markets worked. Information had turned into a sharper weapon than any knife. The church, which was already split by arguments, became much more split because of false information. People said that the Pope had died, but the next day they said he was still alive. After fake orders said they didn't have to pay tithes, whole areas stopped paying them. Inquisitors become harsher when they were overwhelmed by the torrent of speech, punishing anyone who was thought to be propagating lies. But the more they sought to control the internet, the more it fought back. For every message that was burnt, 10 more showed up. War itself even started to change. Armies no longer just relied on how many people they had. They fought with falsehoods. Before a combat, fake instructions would go around, making soldiers march in the wrong direction. Castles gave up without a fight, because they were deceived by communications saying that reinforcements would never come. Because commanders couldn't discern actual directives from fake ones, whole campaigns fell apart. The battleground of steel and the battlefield of truth had become one, and they could never be divided again. For the average person, life turned into a tempest of turmoil. A farmer in England would hear that the plague was gone, while a shepherd in Spain might read that death was spreading quicker than fire. A merchant in Venice got warnings of storms that never happened, while his rival got signals saying it was safe to go, made by people he couldn't see. Fear was always there. Everyone was confused about which message to believe and which voice to trust. And in this storm, a new kind of person came out: the shadow weavers. These men and women were not like regular guild scribes. They didn't care about kings or churches. They made chaos by spreading lies not for money, but for the purest form of power: the power to change reality. It didn't matter what the facts said. If enough people believed the lie, it became true. Reality 56 was about to fall apart by the year 1400. People used to think the web was holy, but now they think it's cursed. Kings didn't believe their messengers anymore. Priests no longer believed what their holy books said. People in villages didn't trust each other anymore. But even with all the mayhem, no one could look away. The web was as important as air, even yet it poisoned the globe with shadows. And in secret monasteries, experts began to talk about a storm that was coming. If lies could bend the web so easily, what would happen if someone discovered how to control it completely? By the start of the 15th century, fear of the web had reached a fever pitch. Once praised as a gift of heaven, it was now whispered of as a tool of demons. The endless flood of lies, forged decrees, and blasphemous messages had broken trust across kingdoms. Leaders who once relied on the network now viewed it with suspicion. Ordinary people, caught between truth and falsehood, demanded someone take control. And so, the Great Purges began. The church was the first to strike. In Rome, fiery sermons declared the web a serpent of deception, its wires and crystals vessels of sin. Monasteries once honored for pioneering the web were accused of heresy. Inquisitors stormed scriptoriums, smashing crystal readers and burning archives of messages. Those who spread forbidden words were dragged to the stake, condemned not for their tongues but for their hands upon the glowing glass. Yet no matter how many fires were lit, the web refused to die. Its veins ran too deep, its towers too widespread. Kings followed suit, though for different reasons. Rulers feared not the devil, but rebellion. They passed harsh decrees demanding that only royal scribes could post to the web. Unauthorized messages were punished as treason. In England, soldiers raided taverns where peasants gathered to read glowing texts aloud. In France, guild scribes vanished into prisons, accused of weaving rumors that weakened the crown. But every attempt at censorship sparked more resistance. The web had become a habit too ingrained to be erased. Soon the struggle turned into holy war. Armies marched not against rival kingdoms, but against rival networks. In the German states, lords who aligned with the pure web, a censored version controlled by bishops, waged crusades against neighbors who allowed free voices. Villages were burned, not for faith or coin, but for the messages their people shared. Across Spain, entire regions rose in rebellion after the crown severed their connections. declaring them unworthy of the network. Battles once fought with swords now began with signals, each side cutting the other's wires before drawing steel. The violence bred martyrs. In Florence, a group of young scribes was executed for refusing to stop transmitting banned poems. There, deaths were broadcast across the web itself, copied thousands of times in glowing runes that no king could erase. The more rulers tried to silence voices, the louder those voices became. Yet beneath the chaos, a darker truth emerged. The weavers, those secret guilds who had always shaped the web, thrived in the shadows of censorship. While kings and priests fought each other, the weavers learned to build hidden networks, invisible to both crown and church. Through codes and illusions, they created spaces where forbidden words could flow unchecked. These secret channels became the seed of something greater, something no ruler could touch. A truly independent web. By 1450, Reality 56 was burning. Fires of purity lit the night skies of Europe, but the flames could not cleanse the world. The web had become too vast, too essential, too deeply woven into the bones of civilization. And while kings and bishops fought to claim or destroy it, the people themselves were beginning to see a truth that could not be silenced. The web belonged to no one. Reality 56 was about to fall apart by the middle of the 15th century. Europe was a continent that was split in two, with scars from both steel and words. In the time it took for a rumor to spread, kingdoms rose and fell. The church burned down. Many crystal towers, but more grew in secret. Kings made the web illegal, but their own generals couldn't live without it. There was a whisper for every order, a spark for every fire, and a stronger voice for every hush. The people of this earth would never be the same again. Kids who used to play in fields suddenly had to learn codes and runes before they could read parchment. Peasants who used to bend their heads in silence now confidently argued with kings and priests, getting their strength from voices from all over the continent. The old order was falling apart, and no crown or mitre could save it. The Eclipse War started in 1475. It all started with fake communications saying that the Pope had sold the internet to the Ottoman Empire. There was no such deal, but by the time the denial reached the cities, armies were already on the move. Christian kingdoms didn't fight against Islam. They fought against each other. Each side was sure that betrayal was about to happen because of false communications. For 10 years, Europe was covered in blood, and the web was hotter than ever, full of shouts for revenge and optimism. When the conflict eventually ended in fatigue, it left behind something that no one expected. People didn't trust kings, popes, or even guild leaders anymore. They didn't see the web as a voice of God or rulers, but as a reflection of all people. It held both lies and truths. It disseminated light as well as flames. The people who lived through the conflict didn't give up. They added to it. New networks formed, not by crowns but by groups of people. Villages connected with their neighbors, without asking the king for permission. Universities developed open channels so that scholars from all around the world may openly communicate their findings. Merchants built markets that spanned continents. They no longer asked kings for permission. Instead, they relied on contracts that were enforced by reputation throughout the web. The big powers had sought to put the network in chains, but failed. Now it belonged to the people. In ways we can't even imagine, science moved forward. Astronomers from all over the world worked together to map the stars and planets, finding them centuries ahead of time. Doctors talked about the plague and how it spread and how to slow it down. Engineers constructed machines based on concepts shared throughout kingdoms. These machines were made of wood, iron, and crystal, and hummed with energy. Within a generation, ships were guided not just by stars, but also by charts that could be transferred immediately through glowing relays. Art, too, was set free. In England, playwrights acted out plays that Persian poets had composed. Painters worked together across boundaries, sending sketches back and forth until their ideas came together. Music moved faster than armies. Ballads jumped from village to village until everyone in Europe was singing the same song. The web had created a civilization that no monarch could claim, no priest could own, and no weaver could wholly manage. But with independence came a hard truth. The web hadn't gotten rid of the defects in people. It had made them worse. Lies are still out there. Wars were still going on. Greed still got into every part of life. But people have learnt to deal with the storm. The residents of Reality 56 no longer wanted to shut down the web. Instead, they dreamed of becoming masters of themselves within it. The Middle Ages were over by the year 1500. The Renaissance was barely starting in our world. But in Reality 56, a new era had already begun. The Age of Sparks, when knowledge and imagination jumped decades ahead. There was never a need for printing presses here. Hence, they were never made. Wars of information moved faster than wars of gunpowder. Communities watched in real time as captains explored the oceans. The biggest change wasn't in technology, it was in people. People thought their voices mattered for the first time in history. A peasant from a little village could talk to the whole globe. A monk living in a faraway monastery may argue with kings. The web has made something both lovely and dangerous, people who no longer had to stay quiet. And so, Reality 56's Middle Ages ended not with the calm emergence of art and science, but with a loud clamor of voices that were many and unstoppable, weaving themselves into a single eternal tapestry. The world was still broken, still scarred, and still divided, but it was awake. The web wasn't a gift from angels or a scourge from devils. It was, like everything else, a mirror of people. And a new world began to form in its light. Welcome to Beyond the Fractals. Subscribe now and explore every reality.